Today I messed up by changing the baby. When my wife and I had our first little one, I threw myself into being a dad with open arms. Feeding, bathing, and of course, changing nappies. Nighttime in particular those forward few weeks, making the most of my paternity leave, taking the bulk of night changes and feeds to allow her to recover from childbirth. A few weeks in, I felt confident in my nappy changing abilities. Having gone from a complete novice only a month earlier, I could now change a nappy in under a minute, even blurry-eyed in the early hours of the morning. Which brings me to the timing of my FU. It's 4 a.m., the 3-week-old baby has disturbed, and upon performing a sniff test, I determine that there is a full, dirty nappy waiting for my attention. I gather the necessary items, a clean nappy, wipes, a nappy sack and a changing mat, all set up on our bed on my side, next to my sleeping wife. Placing my little bundle of joy on the mat, I quickly stripped her off to assess the damage. Here was my first mistake, thinking it wasn't much, so I could just whip off the old nappy, do a quick wipe and back on with the new. Then on to my second, more fatal error. Using one hand, I gather up the baby's feet and lift her bum slightly off the mat to reach underneath and wipe more effectively. Cue the baby grunting in the manner of a wild boar, as what can only be described as a jet-propelled stream of baby poo rockets 3 feet across the bed, all over the bedding, the mat, and me. I panic. Grabbing at the packet of baby wipes nearby, I attempt to stem the liquid flow from running off the bed and onto the floor. My panicked efforts disturb the sleeping wife, who awoke to the sight of her newborn daughter, covered in feces, whilst her husband, also covered in feces, attempts to stem a tide of chicken korma-colored baby poo from slipping off the bed. Taking pity, my wife slid the baby over to her side, and, grabbing the baby's legs, attempts to repeat my actions of wiping the child. Before I could utter a word of warning, the baby lets out another feral grunt, follows by yet another explosion of korma-colored poo, all over my wife's side of the bed. A full half an hour of cleaning later, the baby was sound asleep, but we were scarred for life, and down one set of bedding which we couldn't face trying to clean. Today I messed up by reading yaoi at my cousin's wedding. So this happened yesterday and I'm still dying of embarrassment. So this happened during the wedding reception. I was really bored and I didn't really get along with the family members I was sitting with. So I took out my phone and after 5 minutes of mindless scrolling, I decided to read Killing Stalking. If you know the manga, I am so sorry for you. I was peacefully reading chapter 18 and if you've read the chapter, it starts with a very passionate scene. That's when my cousin's husband looked at my phone and saw what I was reading. He asked what I was reading and I looked at him mortified. I immediately turned my phone off and tried to say it was just a manga. He laughed and told my mom what happened and I got scolded by my mom for reading that in a wedding. My mom has been joking about it all day which is making me feel even more embarrassed. Edit. Wow, I didn't expect so many PPL to see this lol. To give you all more details. I was sitting on the end row so I didn't have anyone on the left side of me and my mom left to get drinks so no one was on my right side, and no one was really paying attention to me. As well, I saw PPL ask my age and I'm 16. And as well, I'm an idiot. I don't know why I thought Killing Stalking was a wedding-friendly thing to read. My mom has been joking about it and that's how I found out that my cousin husband as well knew what Killing Stalking. I'm glad my family doesn't really care too much but it's still embarrassing. TIFU took my mom for her driver's test after she failed the first time. This happened last week. Mom is turning 79 in a few days, and the state sent her the trifecta. She needed an eye exam, written exam and driving test. I took her a couple weeks ago, and she passed the written and eye test, but didn't pass the driving test. She blamed everyone else but herself, of course. I agreed to drive her for a retake last week. We went to a different facility so she wouldn't get the same examiner. I waited inside while she tested, walked outside when she pulled up and she told me to walk in with the examiner. I asked the lady if she passed and she said she did, and I was getting the paperwork for mom. She has trouble walking distances. I shot off a text to my siblings while waiting for the paperwork to print. Mom passed her driver's test. Gathered the paperwork, drove mom home, and my phone was going off with text notifications. I pulled up to mom's house and saw 26 notifications. My brother was there and asked me if I read any of the texts yet. One of my brothers was driving when I sent the text. He read the notification on his watch, and only saw mom passed. He pulled over to open the whole text to see the rest of the sentence. The texts were all saying how we would notify him by text, we'd send him a letter like in the olden days, or smoke signals, etc. Then lots of gifs about mom's driving that would be funnier if they weren't too close to the truth. Later that day, I unintentionally did it again when I was talking with my son. He knew about mom retaking the test and when I got home, we were casually talking and I said, "Oh, grandma passed." Pause because in my brain, it was a continuation of the conversation from earlier this morning. Then I remembered to finish the dang sentence, her driver's test. My husband was there and called me cruel. I truly didn't mean to say it that way, I don't joke around like that. My son was relieved and I apologized and then told him about what happened earlier with his uncle reading the text. Today I messed up by eating fast and being mistaken for a convict. I recently just got out of the US Marine Corps, and moved to Australia to live near family while I complete a degree with the GI Bill. Anyway, I was out in town meeting with some potential employers and have been busy all morning and afternoon, so I found myself getting a real late lunch at this small Japanese joint that was pretty busy. Being ex-infantry, old habits tend to die hard. Within 2 minutes of teriyaki chicken and rice being delivered to my table, I've completely demolished the entire plate with barely a rice grain left in the bowl. I wolfed it down, and I guess I was slightly hunched over it the whole time because I was starving. Some larger, heavily tattooed, biker-type looking gentleman noticed that impressive teriyaki turbo demolition, and also noticed I was built somewhat well and had a tatted up left arm myself. He came up to me and asked immediately, "How long have you been out?" Now military dudes can easily recognize other military dudes even if they're dressed normal. I was, just a t-shirt and jeans, so I thought that was what he was referring to. I just got out is more or less what I told him, thinking that's what he meant. Heiko or underscore? I couldn't remember the name of the other West Australian prison he mentioned, but my dumbass just assumed those were Australian Army bases. Nah, Camp Lejeune in the States. I told him. At that point his eyes opened wide and he was telling me that I was hard shit, which is what began to confuse me because as far I was concerned Lejeune was nothing special. Just a big multi-purpose base. I was initially like and he clarified it's because I was in America. He hadn't used the words jail or prison to any extent in the conversation yet, and he even sat down to chat with me. We kinda had some small talk about how the transition is hard and so is readjusting your habits and language to be society friendly, and sure enough he finally asks what I was in for. Assuming he meant my MOS, I just went, "Oh, infantry." "What so kids?" We kind of just looked at each other after that, me confused at the stupidity, him in disgust. I clarified that's what they called grunts, and then it finally comes up that he was talking about what I was in jail for, to which I answered I'd never been, and we both had a bit of an awkward oh shit moment and laughed it off like dumbasses. We both apologized for being stupid and went our separate ways. Today I messed up. An online review of a bar and grill leads to being denied service. I live in a small town where everybody knows everybody, and one of the few restaurants in this town changed ownership. No big deal, right? Well, as one would expect, many things about this restaurant changed with new management. There's a new food supplier, meaning a change in food quality, there's a new rearrangement of tables and chairs, and unfortunately a noticeable drop in how quick service is. Like I would be seated at 11:30 a.m., just ahead of the lunch rush, and I wouldn't get my food until 12:30 p.m. I know they have the wait staff, but for whatever reason, they want one waitress doing all the tables. I got it in my mind that I ought to leave a review that got me in hot water with the new owner. If you would have asked me before, old owner sold the restaurant's name, I would have told you that it would be a 10/10 experience 100% of the time. Unfortunately with new owner, there's been a lot of changes, both good and bad. Unfortunately the only waitress doing all the tables means she falls behind with getting food and drinks to everyone in a timely manner. Old owner used to have up to 4 waitresses working at a time, and at the time of writing this, all of them are still employed. If one couldn't make it, old owner would help the wait staff. I have not once seen new owner get off his ass in the back room to help with an overwhelmed waitress. This is just from my observation alone during the lunch rush. The weekends bring almost triple the foot traffic, and there's still only one waitress working. I've heard people saying it took up to 2 hours before they were served their food. The solution is simply going back to the old model the old owner had, which is having more than one waitress working at a time, so nobody is being overwhelmed. Emo, new owner, needs to get off his ass and be a leader, and not a boss. Until new owner decides to put more waitresses on the floor, I'd recommend buying all the beer and food that'll satisfy you, and then close out your tab. Well, turns out that their boss watches online reviews like a hawk, and he came across my review, and complained about it to the waitress working that day. Several days passed by, and I decided to go over to the restaurant's bar side for a few beers with friends after we got done hauling away some cows. We all belly up at the bar, get carded by the bartender, and then get our beers. With all the banter going on with my buddies, the new owner managed to walk by at just the right time, and caught wind of my name. Dude straight up asks, "Are you my first name?" I confirm that to him, and then he asks, "Last name, right?" I confirmed to him that both were correct. His next question was pretty much, "If you hate the service here so much, why are you even here in the first place?" I asked him what he meant by that, and he pulls out his phone and shows the review I left for the restaurant. I forgot I used my Google account with my name. I also forgot that I even left a review, because I was drunk and laying in bed at that point. He put me on the spot, and repeated the question. I just respond with saying we're just having a couple beers. The guy responds with, "Yay, well, I think you should take your business elsewhere." I ask what he meant, and he just says I didn't stutter. It's messed up that you would spend money at the business you threw shade at, and not considering a consequence. As he points at the door. I ask him if I could finish my beer, the dude says no, and keeps pointing at the door. I chuckle, nervously, NGL, and say I can pay my tab and he basically said no, I just want you out. Now leave. Bye. I leave, and my buddies just went ahead and gunned down their beers. We decided to just meet up at someone's shop, and drink there anyways.